The recording that'll follow after this is the third part of a ministerial Bible study that we had on December the 3rd. The last part of this service, some of the mics were having some trouble, and it didn't pick up very clearly a lot of the questions and things that came up at the end of that service. So let me just explain what instigated some of the last few statements at the end of the service. There had been a number of questions about different types of cultural practices and even different methods of healthcare and fitness and other things that may have paganized roots. And the answer that I gave that will follow this, which is only about 10 minutes long, is in response to those questions about some of the things that are present in our culture that we need to make sure we understand what their roots are so we know whether or not it would be godly or ungodly to be doing those things, and then how that applies also to the church in terms of our doctrine and practices and our standards and understanding where the roots of those things came from.
I think that the wisest thing to do is always go back to the root. Look for the root, the origin point. Where did this come from? Not just from the standpoint of what culture it came from, but what seed bed did it grow out of? Did it come out of a religious practice like you're describing with some of these things, which absolutely did. You're absolutely right in everything you're saying. And sometimes it isn't just that it came out from some false religion. There's things that are taught in the churches that we'd be wise to go back to the source of who taught it. There's even methods that we've used at times in churches that if you went back to who started that method, and here's another layer, all right? It's not just who started it, because we're all humans, right? You can't just point at somebody and say, well, that person had some sin in their life, so I'm not going to believe anything they taught. You'd have to mark out most of the Bible, then they all had sin in their lives. And some of them were horrifying sinners, like Solomon and David, who wrote some powerful things. So you can't just write it off because a sinful person wrote it. But if a sinful person was the origin, which they're the origin of anything, it's human, and you can go back and see what their motive was for doing it, and it's not a good motive, now that's pretty important to be able to do. So there's another layer. You go back to the roots of something in terms of its, say, religious roots, but we also, even in our church, even in our body of churches, we need to say, all right, we have a certain way of doing things. Where did that originate? It isn't just about calling on ancient landmarks, which I sometimes hear this phrase, we've got to go back to the ancient landmarks. What ancient landmarks are you talking about? Is it brother so-and-so's teachings? That's their ancient landmarks. Is it that brother's teachings? Is it this person's standards or that? We've never had an entirely universal, unified in this body, other than when we were divided. At times we were divided in smaller groups. But as a whole group, there's no one single set of ancient landmarks. There's different ones. So the only ancient landmarks you can truly trust are biblical landmarks. You go back to something that's based on the Bible. It isn't about going back to something a man said, unless it's based on the Bible. It has to be. But the other danger is you have to go back to, okay, so-and-so, who was somebody in the past, was the origin of this, a person, a group, whatever. What motivated them to do it that way? I've seen some things done in churches that the motivation was purely control. The whole reason they did it that way is for control. And if you can find that that's the motivation, that isn't something that should be part of our order. If that was intended to control and manipulate, it should not be something we should use. I don't care who it came from. And so we always have to think through, and I'm glad you brought it up, because this is very important. We always tend to want to go back to something to hold on to as a foundation. This is enough. This is enough. Thank you, Brother Jesse. Thank you, brother. It's enough. And if men have had beautiful interpretations of it and things that are true and in line and in harmony with the Bible, that's good, and that's part of our heritage as well. But the ancient landmarks are right here. They're all here. They're not somewhere 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago, unless it's things that came out of here. Now, that's where we go. So for us, if you're looking at something like some of the subjects we were just touching on, I want to know what the roots of the thing is. I want to know what the source material is. Where did it originate, and what was the motivation for it? And yoga is a good example of that, because you could say where it originated, and that by itself may not be a bad thing. It may just be that somebody wanted to come up with some exercises. Things like Pilates have been that way. Martial arts like Krav Maga have been that way, where they weren't built on anything that was religious. It was really just scientific. But if you go back and you look at the origin and the motive for the origin, so why was yoga created? It was created as a form of worship. That's dangerous then, isn't it? And so we need to do the same thing. We go back and say, okay, here's how we do things. Why do we do it? We have to ask why. We always have to ask why. Where is it at and why? If it's in the Bible, I still want to know why, but I'm willing to not have to always know the answer to that. Because if it's here, you're not going to always know why. There's some things God does, I don't know why. You can say, why would you have to do that? Because he said to do it, all right? I don't have a better why than that. I might be able to come up with some rationale, but that's it. But when we're looking at things like you're describing, whether we're talking about things outside the church where we have to be careful in terms of the influence of New Age thinking, and Eastern religion especially is very influential right now. People don't even know it's influential, but it's affecting a lot of things. Those are pretty important things for us to track the lineage back. Go back through the family tree. Where did this come from? Who started it? Why did they start it? What were they trying to do? It's the same way we look at, by the way, you mentioned this, holidays that people celebrate. That can be a lot messier because there are a lot of different viewpoints about origins of some things that some of it, the information isn't as clear as people think. I've seen whole books written about, Christmas, for example, and pagan origins of Christmas where 90% of the things in the book are absolutely not historical. They don't even know what they're talking about. They just copied something someone else, and it becomes a domino effect. And I've seen other things just like that too. So we have to be wise enough to go back to the source. And then if it's something we're uncertain about, we need to find out what motivated its beginning. Was it religious, like you're describing? The reason that question is not just important for us to be guarding ourselves against influences that would not be good for Christians to have influencing them, and I appreciate your deep thinking on that. But we have to do the same thing even inside the church. Where have our doctrines come from? Can we trace them back to the source material? This I'm not worried about. I know enough about this, and I don't just mean from reading it. I have studied its origin. I know how the manuscripts came to be. I know all about this, and I've got complete confidence in this. So if I've got complete confidence in this, if I can track back whatever it is that I believe to this, I'm on safe ground. Tracking it back to a person or to a tradition, that isn't safe ground unless that person or tradition got it from here. So we have to do that within the church in terms of our doctrine, our orders, standards, other things. We have to track them back to the true ancient landmarks, the things that are much older than, there's a reason I'm using that phrase because I got some questions on it. I'm assuming somebody must be discussing it at the ministry meeting. I wasn't able to get there this week. Somebody must have brought it up because I've gotten some questions on it from ministers. So somebody brought it up. And I hope I'm not pushing anyone's buttons, but there are no ancient landmarks that aren't in the Bible. God already laid the ancient landmarks. The ancient landmarks, it's only used a few times in the Bible, by the way, that phrase. They are the boundary lines set to tell you what your property line was. God set them. They don't change. Changing them, adjusting them, is a highly dangerous thing. He said, do not remove the ancient landmarks. He wasn't talking about something that happened in the 20th century. He's talking about the landmarks he laid. The ancient landmarks are all in here. If we start producing something different than what's in here, we're the ones moving the ancient landmarks. If we create a body that is based on something that's not in the book, we've moved the ancient landmarks. The ancient landmarks aren't something one of us created. If 100 years from now, I'm not going to be alive 100 years from now, so I don't mean it like that. But if 100 years from now the Lord hasn't returned and I've held my integrity and we've done a great and mighty work here, and I pray to God if I've held my integrity, I've got a name in heaven, not just in the earth. The people are remembering the legacy I left behind. That isn't what you base your life on. You base it on this. If 100 years later people are calling back on Brother Bear and saying, Brother Bear taught this, and we don't want to move from what Brother Bear taught because that's an ancient landmark. I hope that's true for only one reason, because it came from here. Because if the ancient landmark that I laid down 100 years later came from the source, you can bank on that. You can hold to that. You can anchor yourself to it. But it doesn't matter if it came from me. It wouldn't matter if I'm the greatest man of God that's ever walked the earth. I'm not equal to this. None of us are equal to this. No man that's ever been in our body or in any church has been equal to this, but Jesus. We haven't had anybody equal to it since the early church. They weren't equal to it. God just lifted them up enough to let them add to it. But we're not adding to the Bible. We don't get to add new things. There's no new landmarks that we're laying down somewhere that one day you're going to have to remember the ancient landmarks that Brother Bear laid here in green. Only if they're from the Bible. Only if they're the Word of the living God. Because I'm not creating some new body or church. I'm trying to rebuild the original.
Hallelujah.
We don't need any landmarks that aren't the original. There's a lot of them, though. There's a lot of them, and they're hard enough to keep. They're hard enough to keep in the boundaries of. I don't know why I'm saying all this. There must be a reason.